program. Welcome again to the Backyard Bird Feeding Program. This is our 105th episode of the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series, and I'm so excited about this topic. I actually really got into natural resources because of birding. My mother was an avid birder. I was lucky to live out near the river in southern Minnesota, and we actually tracked the number of birds that we saw through the seasons, and we actually got over 100 birds down in the floodplains down in southern Minnesota on the Blue Earth River. So that was over many years, but I actually would burn them, all the species, into a board that we kept right at the edge of our deck where we had a tree growing up through it. So I have a long history of birding, and it's really actually been something that's kicked off my love of nature, or actually, helped me really get into that. So I'm excited to share some of that with you today, and have our non-game wildlife program expert, Lori Naumann, who's here with us today, and she's going to go through a lot of great tips. So welcome, Lori.
Thank you. That's a great story, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, so bird feeding, I think, is a gateway drug, right? I think you start feeding your birds in your backyard and a whole new world opens up to you, and you start recognizing birds and their colors and being able to identify the species, and then just seeing them in your backyard is not enough. You have to go out and find them elsewhere, or you look online and you start identifying them that way. So I think this is a really great way to kind of segue the two, starting feeding in your backyard, but then getting out into nature and going out into your local, even just your local neighborhood. Any place where there's water typically is where you're going to find any kind of birds. And so it's just really fun. So today we're going to talk about the different kinds of bird feeders that you can use, and the different types of food that you should be putting in your feeders to attract specific species. So I have a lot of slides to go through today. I'll be going through them rather quickly because it's a lot of information, but it's also a lot of images of really beautiful birds and the images are all Carol Henderson's. They all were taken by Carol Henderson in his backyard for the most part. Carol was the previous non-game wildlife program leader. He developed the program and started it back in the 1980s, and he's an icon, and I'm sure many of you recognize that name. I was privileged to have him as my supervisor for over 20 years, and I'm privileged to be able to carry on his tradition and I'm honored that I've been asked to do this today. So let's go. This is a northern oriole, by the way, an image, the orange one. And of course, why am I not able to advance my slides? That's just, okay. So top 10 bird foods for Minnesota. And I am going to be specifically talking about Minnesota species today because we're Minnesota DNR. So we're going to talk about the state and what you can find here during migration and non-migration times. So sunflower seeds and cardinal mixes are popular for just about any species. A lot of times they're called cardinal mixes because they will attract cardinals. And in the southern half of the state, cardinals are more common than in the northern half, but they're starting to advance further north as the climate changes. Safflower seeds are very popular. Millet seed and millet mixes, Niger thistle and finch mixes, corn, peanut butter, suet, deer ribs or deer fat, fruit and grape jelly, mealworms, and sugar water. And we're going to talk about all of those. Sunflower seeds. So this is a white-breasted nuthatch that has a black oil sunflower seed in its beak. And the black oil sunflower seeds are the most popular with birds. And so they're probably one of the best and easiest seeds to use. So this is an image of the black oil sunflower seeds. They're very high in protein. They're easy for both small and large songbirds to break open. And so that's why, we recommend them. And they can be messy though, but they are best for all around bird feeding, for either in bird feeders or on the ground. And this is an image of a rose-breasted grosbeak. There are also striped sunflower seeds, but they don't have as much fat content in them. And like humans, birds like a high fat content. And so they're not quite as popular, but they're harder for the small songbirds to crack open, but they're good for the larger songbirds like cardinals and grosbeaks. You can also purchase sunflower hearts. These are probably going to be more expensive, but they're easier for some of the birds that don't have the huge beaks, and they're, highly edible. The inedible hulls are, eliminated, and this way it's not going to leave such a mess in your yard. And so this might be desirable for people who don't want to mess on their yard or their deck or wherever it is. So it's waste free. It does spoil more quickly, so it's more beneficial in the winter time. Also because of the high fat content in nuts. So some of the birds that prefer sunflower seeds are the black-capped chickadee, and this is a very popular backyard bird. You're going to find this in almost every yard in every neighborhood in the entire state. This is another white-breasted nuthatch, and this is a moose antler that someone is using as a bird feeder. And this is just a creative way of using what you have in your natural environment, or that you might already have, and not have to spend money on a bird feeder. You just put it in something else that you have or on the ground. Northern cardinal. So they love black oil sunflower seeds or the striped ones. They will eat either, and they tend to be ground feeders, but they will go to feeders as well. And this is the female cardinal. Evening grosbeaks are northern Minnesota birds for the most part. They will come down in the southern part of the state, but more often, if you're a northern Minnesota person, you've seen these evening grosbeaks. And of course, again, they like the black oilers or the striped sunflower seeds because they have the big, strong beaks to be able to crack those open. This is my favorite bird, the rose-breasted grosbeak, and this is a male, and we will typically see these in Minnesota, from May through September. Some people have them that entire time throughout the state, but some people only see them throughout migration. And I only got them in my yard in spring migration. I would never see them in the fall, but they love the black oil sunflower seeds as well.
We were talking earlier, Lori, I just lived down the street from you, or other side of town, and I had lucky enough to have a family that was a year, all summer long resident of grosbeaks, which was really cool.
That's awesome. And,
Yeah.
we'll talk about that a little bit later about the differences in landscape in your yard and how you can either landscape or place your feeders in order to enhance and attract more birds.
Right.
Landscaping makes a big difference.
Yes.
So this is a female rose-breasted grosbeak. So again, this is the male and this is the female. You can see how different they look. And this is the fun part about bird feeding is you can go out and, if you've got binoculars and you're watching these birds at your feeders, you'll be amazed at the number of species. You may, as a whole, look out there and think you're just seeing a bunch of LBBs, which is little brown birds. But if you really start to look at them closely, you'll see all the different species, and it just is so fascinating, especially for kids. I love to introduce my grandkids to the birds in the backyard, and they just would get so excited when they could identify a specific bird in the backyard. It's just, yeah, it's a gateway drug. So this is a male house finch, and you're going to see these almost everywhere in the state as well. They like the black oil sunflower seeds. This is the female house finch, which looks an awful lot like a lot of the sparrows, but if you look closely enough, you can differentiate between the different small brown birds. So this is another type of bird food that you can purchase. It's probably going to be a little bit more expensive, but it's got peanuts and quite a few different types of nuts in it. So you can see it's got some pecans in there. It's got peanuts. It's got there's a number of different nuts in there. And of course, birds are going to love any of this, but also squirrels it will as well. So you need to keep that in mind. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So this is a cardinal mix, and this has quite a few different types of seeds in it. Cardinals can eat all of this, but they're really going to love it because it provides a lot of fat content, but it also provides a variety. And when you provide a variety of food for birds, they tend to be happier with that, just like the rest of us are. You know, they don't want to eat the same thing all the time. So now we're going to talk about the different types of feeders. So these are different types of feeders that you can either make yourself. You can see that there's not a whole lot of difficulty to some of these, but there are some important features, such as the screen in the lower right-hand corner. You can see the screening on the bottom of that, and that is so that if it rains, those seeds are not going to be sitting in water. The upper two feeders have holes in them so that the water can drain out in case there's any kind of rain, unless you have them under some sort of a covering where they're not getting exposed to water. And then in that case, you can provide the fly-through feeder, which is in the lower left-hand corner, and that one is typically put on a pole. The great thing about a lot of the bird food stores now, and I used to say just bird food stores, but now even just places like Fleet Farm and Target and a lot of other places have a lot of different options for bird houses, bird feeders, building your own. They provide the poles and the attachments and all the things that you need to build these feeders or bird houses. So it's kind of great that that is becoming a more popular hobby now. But you can also not spend money at all and just use old tree stumps and use this for sunflower seeds. And this is great because there's less cleanup involved, and you just keep putting it in one spot. But you do want to keep the ground and your feeders clean, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So this is a large lean-to feeder. And so if you have a large yard and you have a number of different species and you're just feeding an awful lot at a time, this works really good for pheasants and cardinals. You do need to be careful about feeding in areas where CWD might be a problem for deer, because you're not supposed to be providing, it's restricted. You cannot provide food for deer. And so you need to keep that in mind. When you're using this type of fifth feeder. So you should only use this in an area where it's legal, where there is no CWD and it's not restricted feeding. So this is another type of lean-to feeder, and it's made out of landscape timbers. White millet is really popular for some of the smaller songbirds, and especially things like indigo buntings, which is the lower left-hand photo. And then there's the American tree sparrow in the lower right hand. And it's easier for them to eat these small little millet pieces, and they just love it. But you do want to feed this sparingly, because this is something that house sparrows, which are considered invasive species, are really attracted to. So this is a male indigo bunting, and I used to get these in the spring during spring migration as well. And they always came to that millet. Did you used to see these too, Jeff?
I have very infrequent, mostly when they're migrating through, they'll show up, which I was going to mention. I've kept a list of when we see some of these species. That's a great activity I did with my kids, and they would write on the sheet right again by the window, so they're out by the bird feeder where we're watching them. And having that there tells me the first time we saw indigo bunting was May 15th or whatever, that next year I should start watching for them. So having a journal or something like that is really helpful to know when you should start looking for them.
Exactly, because birds migrate at different times. So we say that, for instance, blue herons, great blue herons, you will see them on St. Patrick's Day. That's usually the first time you'll see those. But then you may not see the indigo buntings until May. So each species is different in the way that they migrate. And so, yeah, that's a great idea to keep a journal. So then you can buy some of the less expensive millet mixes, and this kind of has all the different millet and sunflower seeds and cracked corn and those kinds of things. And you want to just use this during spring and fall migration. Otherwise, in the summertime, they don't necessarily need this big variety, and you're just going to be feeding the squirrels pretty much. So, brown-headed cowbirds. I wanted to. I kept this slide in because we do want to talk a little bit about brown-headed cowbirds and that they can be parasitic. Parasitic birds are birds that will lay their eggs in the nests of other birds. And the reason that that's considered parasitic is because they might lay a giant egg in the nest of a tiny little chickadee. And then what happens? Well, that egg either smothers the other small eggs, or that bird will the chick will grow to be so big that it's going to drown out the chickadees. Like they're not going to be able to get enough food because mom is going to be feeding mom is going to feed all of the chicks in the nest regardless of how big their mouth is. But the cowbird is kind of taking over, and so it is considered parasitic. They are still songbirds, they are still protected, but they can be kind of a problem. But they're fun. They make great noises, and they're fun to have around regardless.
They're kind of cool looking. The black sheen, the different colors they reflect is pretty cool too.
And they make such great noises. I have, I have a friend, neighbor who's, it's his favorite bird. He calls them moo birds. Moo, like cow. Moo.
Yeah, fun.
Fox sparrows. This is another fun one, and these sparrows like to feed on the ground. Another one that if you look closely enough, you can identify this from a different type of sparrow by its stripy breast that it has. And just paying attention to the different birds that you're seeing on the ground, if you look closely enough, you're probably going to see a multitude of different species, even though it might look like just one under the feeder. So keeping binoculars handy by your windows is something that's great to do.
This is a great species too to talk about behavior, because they have the unique scratching and hopping backwards, like you were talking about earlier, that they do on the ground. And so it's a way, behavior is a good way to identify birds, especially in the sparrow family like this, where there are a lot of them look really similar.
Yeah, it's almost like a moonwalk that they do, right? The Michael Jackson moonwalk. They kind of do this little thing, and they're trying to scratch up the seeds that are underneath, and it's a fascinating behavior because each bird has their own different behavioral pattern, and I would argue that even individual birds within the same species have their own behavioral patterns, especially with the larger species. Yeah. This is a white-crowned sparrow. These are spring migrants, and you'll start to see them coming up pretty soon. I would think that they're going to be in the state relatively soon. And you can see this one is feeding on black oil sunflower seeds. This is a dark-eyed junco, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, that for me, in the Twin City metro area, the dark-eyed junco signifies and signals winter. So they will typically leave and go further north in the spring, and they come back in the fall. So I know that when they come back in the fall, winter is imminent. And even though that's kind of a foreboding thing, I still love these little juncos because they're just adorable. And they kind of, they're a dark gray color, but they look like they've been dipped in white paint. That's how I describe them. And this is the white-throated sparrow. And the white-throated sparrow has a really fun call, and it sounds like old Sam Peabody Peabody. And I'm not going to whistle it because you can't hear me apparently when I do that, but often songbirds have some sort of a phrase that helps identify their calls. The phrases that are in some of the bird identification books don't always make sense to me. So you can make up your own phrases if you want to, but and some books do make up their own phrases, but typically their song sounds the same, and it's always in the same sort of phrasing and the sing-songy kind of voice. And so that's another way to identify birds. If you don't see them, if you're not seeing them, you can hear them. Mourning dove, a lot of people recognize their call really easily, and they prefer white millet and crack corn, and they're typically only on the ground. I have seen them in my fly-through feeder, but they typically will feed on the ground. The thing I love about mourning doves, they have pink feet. Safflower. So cardinals really love safflower. This surface is difficult for sparrows and other starlings and things like that to hold on to. So if you're trying to get rid of starlings, putting safflower out is a great way to do that. And then golden safflower is a newer type of seed that I find just about all songbirds love, and it's a little more expensive, but I think it's just a toasted version of the regular safflower. And yeah, I started to really get a more songbirds at my feeders when I used golden safflower, and the bears and squirrels don't like it. Corn is something you can put out for blue jays, woodpeckers, and pheasants, and of course squirrels will love it as well. But you also should not be using corn in areas where deer feeding is restricted, which is almost the entire state now unfortunately, because of chronic wasting disease, or CWD. So this is just an example, and this is something, again, you don't want to use this in Minnesota where deer feeding is restricted, but this is a good option for keeping squirrels away from your bird feeders. You build something and put something like this out, and then that way you've got the squirrels busy over here eating the corn and doing their thing at their feeder, and then you've got the bird feeder somewhere else where they hopefully will leave it alone. But you should use this. You can put chicken wire and things like that around it to keep deer out, but certainly if you are attracting deer, you want to not use this, or pull it in at night so that you're not attracting them. So finch foods, goldfinches, redpolls, pine siskins are all considered finches, and these are the different types of foods that they like. They like the Niger thistle, sunflower chips, and peanut hearts. And this is an image of a male goldfinch. The Niger thistle feeders are really, they're good because they only only Niger thistle seed can fit through the tiny little holes. And so it's only going to attract the finches. And you can buy these, and the food lasts a long time within them. And so they're great to use to attract finches. Redpolls are also attracted to the finch mix, and this is an image of a male redpoll using a homemade feeder that someone made out of a plastic pop bottle or water bottle. This is another easily made homemade feeder. It's a deck railing feeder. Now this is something that would also be easy for raccoons or other predators, raccoons, squirrels, deer to get at. So you want to take that into consideration. It's also messy. So putting this on your deck, you're going to either have to clean up quite a bit, or you want to put it in an area that the mess is not going to be a problem. This is another type of feeder that you can build on the outside of your deck so that you don't have the mess falling onto your deck on the inside. Peanuts. Peanuts are going to also attract all kinds of, things in addition to birds, but this is a great food, especially in the wintertime for the woodpeckers. But then in the summer, blue jays and woodpeckers and nuthatches all just really love peanuts. And you can see that this is a homemade peanut feeder that you probably want to hang really high so that some of the other ground feeders don't get to it. It's almost impossible to get rid of squirrels, though, as anyone who feeds birds knows. This is an image of a downy woodpecker, and they love suet and peanuts. So an introduction to the suet part, so peanut butter. Peanut butter is a great thing to use. You can roll peanut butter in seeds, and this is a great activity to use with your children, especially like during winter break or Christmas break. You can put peanut butter on acorns and pine cones. That's what those are, pine cones. And kids love to do this. You can just tie a little string around it, or tie some twine around it, and you can hang these from the trees, and birds just love that. And kids, it's a great way to introduce kids to bird feeding, and they're building their own little bird feeder. This is another homemade bird feeder that you can just use some sort of, an extra log or something that you may have in your yard and just use a drill bit to drill, to sink a hole inside of that and then fill that with peanut butter on this as well. This cavity is empty, but this is how you can feed the woodpeckers in your area. And I have probably 4 different species of woodpeckers that come to my backyard. So it's just really fun to put suet and peanut butter out for them. So this is a squirrel diversion device. Um, Again, the deer, you don't want to feed, you don't want to put corn out in an area where deer feeding is restricted, but this is a great way to keep squirrels away from your bird feeders. You put something like this out and this will keep them busy for a long time. You can hang black walnuts from it, which I have tons of from all of the squirrels in my neighborhood, or corn, something like that. And they can spend hours at a feeder like this and stay away from your expensive bird seed. Suet and deer fat. So this is a female red-bellied woodpecker, and again, woodpeckers just love and need suet and deer fat, especially in the wintertime. This is a male and red-bellied woodpecker, and this is a male eating venison, deer fat. That hunters can provide this to you if they're not using the fat that they have processed, and it's a great way to feed the birds. You can keep it frozen and just put it out in the wintertime if you want, which is probably preferred because you may attract raccoons or other undesirable species. This is a suet feeder. So this is something that you can purchase. You can build one yourself. There is a book, all of these different feeders that I've described. There's a book called Woodworking for Wildlife, and it was written by Carol Henderson, who took all of these photos. And they're going to provide the link for you on how to get that book. It's not as readily available as it used to be, but some of the plans for the different houses and feeders in that book are available online, but you can also still purchase the book. And we're hoping to start producing it again. Minnesota's bookstore at the University of Minnesota used to sell it for us, and they closed during the pandemic. So we're hoping to have that available again soon. This is a homemade suet feeder, so you can just sort of notch out a birch log and put hardware cloth around it and put the fat inside of there and then hang that from a tree or a pole or, someplace in your yard. Birds like cover, and we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. Fruit for the birds, you can put out apples, oranges, grape jelly. This is a great way to put out, some maybe apples that have gone a little bit past their prime. They do prefer fresh oranges. So, if you want to buy an extra orange or two for the birds in the summertime, it's a great way to attract all kinds of things. Again, this is a red-bellied woodpecker, but of course, the orioles and cardinals and bluebirds and several other species are going to be attracted to fruit, especially oranges and orange halves. So you want to, of course, cut it in half, and that color is what attracts them. And they don't really have the capacity to dig through that skin. So it's great to provide a feeder like this, which this one here is homemade, and it just has you just stick the orange on a nail, and then the perch on the bottom helps them to be able to just feed on that. And this is an image of a red-headed woodpecker feeding on an orange half. And red-headed woodpeckers are really rare still in Minnesota, and they're becoming rarer, but there are still some areas in the state in central Minnesota where people are lucky enough to have red-headed woodpeckers, but they prefer old oak stands, and there just are not a lot of those existing in Minnesota anymore. And so most folks do not have the privilege of having red-headed woodpeckers in Minnesota, but we do have them in the state. Robins love apples, so you can put apples out as well, and they will eat the apples. Robins are they're kind of omnivorous, so they are meat eaters as well as nuts and berries and fruit eaters. So they'll eat just about anything. We've seen robins even fishing in the wintertime here in Minnesota. They will find open water and find tiny little fish to eat. It's pretty fascinating. I've been seeing some photos online of robins here in the wintertime fishing. It's fascinating. And this is Swainson's thrush, which is robins are also a species of thrush, but this is just a different type of thrush that will also feed on the apple halves. Grape jelly. Grape jelly is easy to put out. You can use just about any type of a container for grape jelly. It spoils fast, so you don't want to put out too much at a time unless you really have a lot of birds coming to it. You want to keep it probably in the shade, which is why this feeder has sort of a cover on it. And all of these different species will use it: orioles, cardinals, woodpeckers. And they use this typically from May through September. You can also make a nectar mix with the grape jelly, and it's 1 part grape jelly to 1 part water. And the reason why the brand is here is because we have heard from people, and I don't know if this is true or not. I'd love to hear your feedback, but that Welch's grape jelly is the one that birds like. For whatever reason, they don't like the fake stuff. They want the Welch's. I don't know. But far be it for me to promote any one brand. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying that's what some people say. um, so Northern Orioles, which used to be called Baltimore Orioles, but they have been renamed to Northern Orioles. They are attracted to small, shallow dishes of the grape jelly and the orange halves and nectar feeders that are filled with sugar water as well. And they can't use the type of feeder that hummingbirds do, but sometimes they try because they will be attracted to that same sugar water. So there are special feeders for Orioles. Um, and this is just a grape jelly one again, and you can see it's just a plastic tray. You can, use just about anything to put grape jelly in. And this is a great tea post feeders. You can see that it's made from just a part of a um, charred piece of wood. They can just put on a post and then put grape jelly in there or seeds. And then the birds have a place to perch as well. And this is just a fun way to attract birds. And they are also attracted to charcoal. And I promised to look up why, and I forgot. So there's a reason why birds are attracted to charcoal, and they do consume it. They eat the charred pieces of wood, and I've seen them in my own fire pit in the backyard, in the wintertime especially. They're attracted to it, and I can't recall why. Scarlet tanagers. I haven't seen one of these for many years, but they will come to grape jelly feeders, and these are just a beautiful little bird they are now saying that they might be part of the cardinal family. Um, and they're considering changing the species name, but in any case, it's a beautiful bird, and they're actually a lot bigger than you think. They're maybe cardinal size, so it's easy to misidentify them, but obviously the difference is they have dark black wings, and they do not have the crest on their head. Mealworms are super popular for birds that are meat eaters, and so that would be things like robins and bluebirds. And the bluebirds love the live mealworm. So if you have bluebirds in your yard, or if you have a bluebird house in your yard, putting live mealworms out is just a really fun way to attract them and provide food for them. You can purchase them at local bird stores. A lot of stores have refrigerators that they keep the live mealworms in, or you can purchase dried up ones, which I do to feed in the wintertime sometimes to provide that extra protein. But you can also grow your own uh, worms. by purchasing them online from Grubco or Rainbow Mealworms. And no, thank you. I'm not doing that, but I love my birds, but I'm maybe you want to grow grubs, I don't. So this is a chipping sparrow, loving the grub worms, and you just need to put the worms in a shallow bowl that they can't crawl out of. So you want to, it should be smooth on the inside so that they can't crawl out, because they do have feet and they can crawl right out, and then they're no good to anybody but the ground. So this is this is just an example, and you also want to make sure that you keep it in an area, either they're getting consumed quickly enough, or don't put it in an area where they're going to get rained on a lot. And this is an image of Peterson bluebird house with the T-pole and then the grubworms on top of it, and it's a perfect way to provide the mealworms for the hungry bluebirds who might be feeding little ones. So this is an eastern bluebird um, eating a grub, and they really do. I've put these out before on my deck, and I used to get tons of bluebirds when I lived in Oakdale. Do you get these too, Jeff?
Yeah, but they are more a prairie species. So it's interesting, when I first moved in my house in Northeast Metro, we had very small trees and a little more open space, and I had a active bird house with a bluebird. But now that the trees all grew and are so much more mature, there's a lot less bluebirds, and that goes for goldfinches too.
Oh, I didn't know that about goldfinches. Well, that's
Yeah,
good to know. And
they like the open space too.
and that reminds me, that's why you will often see Peterson bluebird houses or other bluebird houses along golf courses, because a lot of golf courses put them up, and if they're still maintaining them, they usually have a pretty good bluebird population. In cemeteries as well, you'll often
Hmm.
see the bluebird houses. So this is nectar for the hummingbirds, of course, and it's the average is 1 to 4. So you want to put cane sugar into 1 part sugar into 4 parts water, and just boil the water, dissolve the sugar in there, make sure you cool it down before you put it in the feeder and put it outside. There's little bee guards. The yellow part of that bird feeder there is a bee guard to keep the bees out. Sometimes they can be pretty relentless, but a best practice for any kind of bird feeder is to keep it very clean. So one thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is clean your feeders every 7 to 10 days. For hummingbird feeders, it's to keep the algae growth or the mold or whatever it is on the inside of your feeders clean. But for other feeders, all of the other ones that I've described, you want to clean them every 7 to 10 days. That sounds excessive, but it's necessary to prevent the spread of disease, of any type of disease. Finches can get an eye finch disease where they have this growth around their eyes and it can cause blindness. It's not necessarily deadly, but it's horrible for the finches. There's high path avian influenza. There's all kinds of different diseases that can be spread through birdie, moldy birdseed and dirty feeders. So a mixture for cleaning your feeders, even the wood type or the plastic ones, is 1 part bleach to 10 parts water. Or if you don't want to use bleach because it's toxic, you can use vinegar. A 50-50 vinegar to water mix is great for cleaning your bird feeders, and it's just a really great practice to do. um, it's just healthier for the environment and healthier for the birds. This is an example of a great disposable feeder. You can just use the plastic seed, or the mesh bags that you get fruit or whatever in, and you can just put it out with some fruit or something that might be a little bit past its prime, and put it right by your hummingbird feeder. It's going to attract birds, and the hummingbirds will love this as well.
We had a question. We're
Yeah,
getting lots of questions. This is wonderful. It seems just like, okay, there's a chance that this one makes sense right here. Someone asked about organic sugar. Have you heard, is that a problem? They said they heard that might not be good to use for hummingbird food.
I
Have you
haven't
heard
heard
that one?
that.
I've not heard that. It shouldn't
I
really
ha
be any different, right? I mean, it's
I use
grown,
I use
similar.
organic. Yeah, I think probably the only problem is with that is that it may grow the algae more quickly. But if you're going through it fast enough, and if that starts to become a problem, if you notice algae in 3 days as opposed to four, just don't put as much water in your feeders. Keep it in your refrigerator and then only fill your feeders up part way at a time. And then you're going to have to do it more often,
Okay.
but you still should clean it every 7 to 10
Yeah.
days, though.
Good tip.
So here's 5 ways to double the number of birds at your feeders. Feed them all 4 seasons. If you're putting out food all year round, birds are going to kind of get used to that and they're going to come around. You don't have to, especially because of the price of bird seed these days. You certainly don't have to. And birds, it's not necessary for birds to be provided with artificial food. So I want to emphasize that. This is a fun activity, but it's not necessary. Birds are going to survive regardless of whether you put food out. And that includes if there's a bird feeding ban because of CWD or whatever. There is not now, and we have never implemented one. But if something like that were to happen, or if you're advised to take your feeders in, the birds are going to be fine. But they love water. They love water in all 4 seasons. So you can buy heated bird baths. Flowing and dripping water is especially attractive for birds. You'll be amazed at the multiple, at how birds multiply in your yard if you have the flowing or dripping water, and putting out clusters of feeders, providing protection from animals, predators, hawks, owls, cats, things like that. And I'm going to cover that in a second with the next slide. And then, of course, cleaning your ground feeders. That's the other thing you want to clean is the ground. When you have all of those seed hulls on the ground and things under your feeders, make sure and keep that area cleaned up regularly as well.
Do you have some suggestions on what to do with, how to manage that? Do you bag it? Do you like rake it into the corner under the leaf matter, or what's your suggestions with that?
Yeah, so you can rake it up. I rake mine into my fire pit, and
Okay.
you can burn it then. But if you can't
Composting,
burn it,
obviously, if you have composting available, that's a great option.
yep, you can compost it. Or keep it in one particular area if it's not going to get moldy, things like that. And then like you said, you can put it, you can throw it in the garbage. The seed hulls are not necessarily valuable for any type of food for any animals. So it's something, I mean, eventually the mice might eat it, things like that, but it is going to
Mhm.
attract those little rodents. So that's another reason to keep it clean so that you're not attracting, other bad things.
Yeah,
So yeah,
Melanie had a related question about reusing some of that food that falls out, put it back in the feeder. That is a definite no, right? Once it's probably gotten in the ground, and there's more chances of bacteria and other pests, diseases
precisely.
that, yeah.
Where birds feed, they also poop. So they're crapping all over all of that stuff on the ground, and that's where the bacteria and the diseases are going um, to manifest. And so you definitely don't want to do that. You want to keep all of that clean. And if you feel like you're wasting too much, one thing, the ground feeding birds typically have, they're going to be eating the things on the ground.
Hmm.
And I've never seen one get sick from eating that, where, the poop and things like that, but you don't want to recycle that back into your feeders. You want to put clean stuff in there, unless you want to clean your feeders every single day, but that's probably not, yeah,
Yeah.
recommended.
But clarification on the organic sugar. Amy said that she was told there's a higher mineral content and which can be harmful to hummingbirds. I don't know.
It's interesting. I'd like to see the research on that. And I'm going to provide my email at the end of this. If you could send me if there's some sort of research on that, or I will look it up and send me an email and I'll try to send it back to you. I'd be interested to hear that because that's certainly something we should know. And I don't want to discount it if it's true.
We'll have to contact Carol about that one.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm sure he knows. Um, so this is a in the lower right hand or left hand corner here, you'll see a heater that you can put for a heated bird bath. I've never seen them separate like this. I've only seen bird baths that have the heater within them, but I think this is something that you can put inside the bowl that keeps the water from freezing in the wintertime. And I do this, I put out water all year round, and birds really do appreciate it, and they need food or water year round. So especially when there is no water in the wintertime, they just really appreciate it. So this is the flowing and dripping water that I talked about. They are so attracted to this kind of stuff. You will just see a ton of birds. And of course, you can see the landscaping in the background, which we're also going to provide a link to Restore Your Shore, which is a program for restoring your shoreline near a lake, but it also is really beneficial for looking up your area and the type of soil and landscape that you might have in your area, in your county, in your specific county, and what types of plants are best for planting in your yard for attracting wildlife and providing habitat. And habitat, along with the water, it's just a really great way to provide for birds in addition to the feeders. And even if you don't have feeders up, if you have water and habitat, you're still going to have birds. They really appreciate the food, the natural food that's there in the seeds of the flowers and the trees and all of that. So this is a couple of, these are not goldfinches. Are they goldfinches, Jeff? Are these goldfinches, this image?
Those are female goldfinches, I believe.
Yeah, because they've got the little, you can see the little stripy thing. Yeah, so these are breeding female goldfinches. So this is, thank you for that. And so a good bird bath or the bird the flowing water that you provide should be about 1.5 to 4 inches deep, and they will take a bath in there, they will drink it, and if it's constantly flowing, it's remaining clean, and it's cleaning itself. And then this is a good example of it's a layout of a backyard and the different trees that are planted and the way that they're planted, and then where you should place your feeders, which is ideal. And this image can also be found in the Woodworking for Wildlife book, but you can also find it online, and different ideas for the way you should landscape or put your feeders out in your yard. And this is an example of how you can provide, this is almost exactly what my bird feeder looks like. I've got the fly through with the hooks on it, and you can hang the different types of things all the way around it. And then this thing at the bottom here is a baffle to keep the squirrels out. Wagon wheel. This is a fun way of putting up multiple bird feeders as well. And again, you're going to have a mess under there if you have quite a few bird feeders and you've got all the birds are messy. Birds are messy. So keeping that area clean and keeping the bird feeders clean can be a lot of work, but it's so worth it. Brush piles. Birds really appreciate brush piles because it provides them a way to hide from predators. And predators can be anything from hawks and owls and eagles to cats, especially. Domestic or feral cats kill lots and lots of songbirds, and they at least birds can go into something like a brush pile like this. It doesn't have to be huge. I like to leave my Christmas tree out after Christmas in the backyard for the birds to use as cover to hide. And if you put it, 10, 12, 20 feet from the bird feeder, it provides a good cover for them. You can also put welded wire around a bird feeder, something like this, on the ground to keep cats and other predators out. But this too is something that you don't want to use in the areas where restricted bird feeding is. Bears. This is an actual photo. So if you live in bear country, you're going to need to put your feeders up really high, or on a pulley system, or bring your feeders in at night, because bears will completely destroy your bird feeders, especially if they have any kind of nuts in them, or peanut butter or anything like that. And they'll destroy the poles, they'll bend them right over, and they can be an expensive predator. So, in closing, kids, bring your kids outside for one thing, but bring them into your enjoyment and involve them in making your feeders, in filling your feeders and cleaning your feeders, and then identifying the birds, because it can really help them gain a lifelong appreciation of birds and nature. And Jeff is a living testament to that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we thank you, Lori. There's a lot of great information, and I don't know if you were tracking, but we had over 300 people participating live with us today, which is I think
Awesome.
a new record turnout for us. So, and over 70 questions.
Oh my
We've been
goodness.
trying to track them. Obviously, folks, we won't be able to get to all of them, but I kind of have some themes that have come through that I'll ask you about in the remaining times that we have here. And one was, I think, related, especially with us live in more urban areas. There, we deal a lot with house sparrows and starlings and sparrows that are kind of take over some of our feeders. Do you have any tips on like trying to diversify the birds that you have, or else reduce the number that you're dealing with, or those other species that might not be as wanted because they're not native or whatever?
Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit, but if you eliminate that millet, the little tiny white seeds, if you completely eliminate that and just put black oil sunflower seeds, I bet your sparrows will disappear. There's also um, the safflower is something that is not attractive for the starlings. And so putting that out during times that you see starlings, a lot of times it's just a matter of switching up your food for a little bit until those undesirable birds go away, and then put the other stuff back out. You don't have to throw away food just because you think it's attracting the wrong bird. Just hang on to it for a little while, get rid of that bird, and then put that other stuff back out.
And the tip of having multiple feeders, and especially in different locations, also will separate birds. And you might have the millet over here, and that's going to be sacrificed for the sparrows or whatever. But if you have the sunflower seeds at another feeder, you'll still get the chickadees and the cardinals at that feeder. So that's a good tip.
Exactly, exactly.
I know you touched on this a little bit too, but a lot of people were asking about issues with wasp and bees with jelly and the sugar water. You have anything to add or tips on that?
Yeah, so there's those little bee guards that I described, but also I have been creating my own cinnamon spray. So there's a number of different like essential oils and oils that insects don't like, that are not going to affect the hummingbirds. And so I mix cinnamon essential oil, just a few drops in a little spray bottle of water, and I spray that on the outside of the hummingbird feeders, or just the where the bee guards are, and it does help to keep the ants
Mm.
and the bees away. Most hummingbird feeders will also have sort of a lip around the top of them that you can put
Water.
water in to keep the ants out. But you can also, I sometimes will soak a cotton ball in cinnamon or peppermint or something like that to keep the insects away.
Okay,
Citronella is another great choice.
great. You talked about adding stuff to your yard, trees. I found spruce trees actually, which again, this is a long-term proposition, planting a spruce tree. But if you know you're going to be around for future generations, they have such great cover to protect the birds from predators, avian especially, and just for area to like thermal warmth in the wintertime, they stay warmer. That spruce trees are a great addition to your neighborhood if you can do
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. That's the
Uh,
tree that I lost in my yard. That's why I don't have birds anymore.
especially cardinals, love them. stopping and starting feeding. Is it an issue, a problem? Should people be worried about that?
No, it is not a problem. Birds don't need
Yeah.
it. They'll be fine. They will find food elsewhere, just because you stop feeding. Because sometimes people have predators, such as, like, I have a broadwing hawk in my backyard that was picking off my birds, so I stopped feeding for a little
Mhm.
while to keep, to make that broadwing find another buffet somewhere else. And it's recommended. Birds are getting supplemental food elsewhere. You are not their only source of food, so it's fine.
The very first question we had, are wind chimes a problem for birding or birds? Are they afraid of them or do they cause issues?
You know, I would say probably. I mean, I would say you don't want to put them close to where your bird feeders are. Birds are more scared and startled by the flashing light or flashing look of something like that moving around a lot. It makes them uneasy, and they're not going to feed and be comfortable at a feeder if they're uneasy. So you just, put them in separate areas. I put my wind chimes out front and my bird feeders out
Okay.
back.
That's a good transition on to another question or a couple of questions about windows. For one, bird feeders on windows, but also just to minimize birds running into windows. Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So putting a bird feeder right on your window, it seems counterintuitive, but it keeps the birds from smashing themselves into a window. I actually did lose a rose-breasted grosbeak to because I cleaned my windows and it ran into my window and died. So a really good way, especially if you have large, big windows, um, put your bird feeders closer to the windows, so that if they do happen to fly off and run into the window, they haven't been flying at such a fast speed that they're going to die. That's
Okay.
one way. Another way is to smear something on the outside of a window. If you notice that it's the window that is constantly being hit by birds and birds are dying or getting stunned by that, put something on the outside of the window. Anything you do on the inside of the window is not going to help. Smearing something on the outside, such as soap, which is easy to clean off after the spring mating season, because sometimes you're going to have cardinals and robins that see their reflection in the window and are trying to kill the other bird that they're seeing. And so that will keep that from happening. But also, migrating birds, they can't necessarily see that a window is a stopping point. And so when they look at it, they see more trees, they see sky, they will keep
Mhm.
flying and they will run into tall buildings. And so that's why we encourage people to turn their lights off at night, because tall buildings can attract. That's a whole nother topic I could go on and on and on
Yeah.
about. But if you want more information, and I'm happy to provide answers to that with my email
Yeah. Can you
at the end,
advance? I think on your PowerPoint. Yeah.
there.
Thank you. A couple more quickly that I think we want to hit because people have been talking about it. A lot of questions. Bird baths, especially in the winter. In fact, some folks said they've seen some actual birds that have died of hypothermia or frozen. What's your thoughts, or what's our recommendations on bird baths, and especially the wintertime?
Um, you know, it's it's pretty rare. I've never seen a bird
Yeah.
die of hypothermia. They are smart enough to know they're not going to actually take a bath in the wintertime. When you provide a bird bath in the winter, that heated water, it's for drinking purposes only. The birds don't actually bathe in it.
I've seen a couple
And
do it, actually.
have you?
I have.
Have you?
Yeah, it's not very common, but those are not the smarter birds, probably.
Well,
But
right. We don't want to kill any birds, and certainly if you
no,
see that
no,
happening, you should probably pull them in. I've heard of birds
it's
freezing
rare.
without any kind of water. I've heard of them freezing to metal fences, fence poles or something like
Mhm.
that. So I mean, it certainly does happen, and we don't want to encourage that, but I've never heard of them dying of hypothermia. But
It's rare, and I would guess. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but it seems like the benefits, especially if there's birds that are, you know, needing water, that they outweigh probably the risks associated with it. Don't quote me.
yeah, because we go through long stretches in the winter in Minnesota where there's not water readily available. I
Yeah,
mean,
or
but
snow even.
even right, or even snow, because they can't. It's so hard and solid here because
Mhm.
we live in the frozen tundra that, it's hard for birds to get water. Yeah.
One more question and we'll wrap it up. A couple of folks mentioned eBird, and I know there's some other bird identification or bird reporting programs you want to share, and kind of how it is you can use those, or what you would recommend on that.
Yeah, so eBird is an excellent, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my my book case here. I have several books that I would recommend. eBird is an excellent online tool that you can join, and you can go on there and you can see what birds are currently being seen in your area, in your neighborhood. So that can help you with the type of food that you put out or where to go see them, because it specifies what's being seen where. And you can use it once you start to become a more experienced birder, and you can actually put in the type of bird that you're seeing. You can take a photo and install it there. Some of the bird identification books, the best one I have is the Sibley Guide to Bird Identification. And I don't know, somebody must have walked off with my Sibley Guide because I can't see it. But oh, here it is. So this is the Sibley Guide. Sibley Guide to Birds is an excellent source for identifying birds, because it has birds in all different phases, in all different color phases. There are different plumages, things like that. It tells you what they look like. Like this is a bald eagle. It shows you what the juvenile looks like all the way up to 5 years old. And it's an excellent, it's one of the best. There are other ones. And if you don't want to spend the money for the Sibley Guide, you can buy the Peterson Guide. There's lots and lots out there. And then there's also Merlin, which is an online app that you can purchase. I use iBird, and iBird is something that has online photos and images.
And I have some cousins who are actually doing some classes online. I think Cornell in particular has a lot of great birding information, research, and programs online. So that's a great
Yes,
resource too.
it
Cornell,
is. And
Cornell University. Yeah.
Cornell University, and they also have audio, so you can hear what the birds sound like as well. So that's really fun. Yeah, Cornell is an excellent source.
Well, we have to wrap up. I apologize for all of the folks that we couldn't get questions answered, but Lori did provide her email. She's very busy right now with the Eagle Cam, which was one of our previous webinars. So again, a reminder, you can go back and watch Lori's presentation on the Eagle Cam and many others on our website. If you just type in outdoor skills, or even there's a link on our front page of mndnr.gov. And next week, in fact, we've been doing this again over 100 weeks. Next week, we have turkey calling techniques. Hard to believe with the weather, but turkey season will be upon us in just a couple of weeks. So we've got some experts from staff that'll be talking about turkeys and turkey calling in particular. And then throughout the spring, we actually have multiple fishing topics that are coming up. So please check those out and register. Again, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Lori, for being here. Great job. And we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, everyone.